Ever get this weird feeling? Like the more freedom you have, the more you feel kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Like that whole open field of choices thing somehow morphs into a cage full of anxieties and what ifs.
Right.
Well, that, my friend, is exactly what we're diving into today. We're tackling Erich Fromm's Escape from Freedom.
Oh, fantastic book.
Now, this book, it first hit the shelves back in 1941 when the world was, kind of a mess, World War II and all that. But here's the thing, it feels even more relevant today.
I agree.
It's like Fromm, he could see the future, especially when it comes to how modern freedom, the kind we have now, can feel less like, liberation and more like a burden.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in this deep dive, we're going to really get into Fromm's head, so to speak.
Okay.
We'll try to understand his main arguments, like why does all this freedom we keep hearing about, why does it sometimes feel like, I don't know, a heavy backpack full of should-Is and what-ifs?
Yeah, it's a great question. What's so insightful about Fromm is that he doesn't, criticize freedom itself.
Right. Instead, he kind of drops this truth bomb. There are actually two types of freedom.
Two types. Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
All right, so Fromm, he calls them negative freedom and positive freedom. Now, negative freedom might sound kind of, negative, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more about freedom from something.
Okay.
Think of it like breaking free from chains or limitations, those things that are holding you back.
Gotcha. I'm imagining, finally ditching a job you hate.
Exactly, or finally graduating,
Yes. Or even just moving out of your parents' house.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that feeling of no more curfew.
Right. But then you realize, wait a minute, I have to actually, make dinner and do my own laundry.
Right. Responsibility. Suddenly, freedom can feel like a lot of work.
It does. It totally does.
Yeah.
So is that what Fromm means? That we're
Right.
kind of good at the whole breaking free part, but then we're not sure what to do with all this freedom?
That's a big part of it, yeah. We've gotten really good at breaking free from things like Russian traditions.
Right. Social structures that feel outdated, those kinds of things. But then we often end up feeling, I don't know, a little lost. Like we've achieved this freedom from, but then what?
It's like being handed a blank canvas and a giant box of paints but no instructions. Exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Exactly. And Fromm, he argues that without a positive way to, to root ourselves, this freedom from can actually feel less like liberation and more like being abandoned.
Abandoned.
Yeah, like we're alone in this big chaotic world that's just spinning without us.
Wow. Okay, so I'm already feeling a little, called out here. But I also know that he wasn't just throwing these ideas out there.
Right.
He backs it up with actual historical examples. Doesn't he talk about the Italian Renaissance?
Yeah.
Like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, that whole era.
Yeah, great example. On the surface, the Renaissance was this explosion, right? Individual genius was celebrated, art, science, you name it.
Right, progress everywhere.
But, as Fromm points out, it was also a time of intense competition.
Ah, I see. So it's like even with all this progress, all this newfound freedom and expression,
There's this shadow side.
there's this dark side lurking underneath.
Yeah, a sense that maybe all this freedom wasn't the utopia everyone thought it would be.
Okay, so then how does Fromm explain that? What's the connection?
Well, he traces it back, and this is fascinating, he traces it back in part to the rise of Protestantism.
Okay, hold on. This is where I need to make sure I'm following. What does a religious movement have to do with, feeling trapped by freedom centuries later?
It's about the underlying message. See, Fromm, he argued that Protestantism, while obviously aiming to reform Christianity, actually laid the groundwork, psychologically speaking, for some of the anxieties that we see even today in modern capitalism.
Whoa, okay, hold on. I need to make sure I get this. So you're saying that a movement focused on, individual faith and direct connection with God
Right, it seems counterintuitive.
somehow leads to feeling less free.
In a way, yeah. It's all about the message. Think about the big ideas from Martin Luther and John Calvin, the superstars of the Protestant Reformation. They really emphasized how humans were essentially powerless when compared to God.
Okay.
Inherently flawed, and here's the kicker, controlled by predestination.
Predestination. Okay, you're gonna have to break that down for me.
So predestination, it's like fate, right? It's the idea that your life, your choices, even your eternal destination, it's already decided, predetermined even before you're born.
Wow. Okay, yeah. I can see how that would create some anxiety.
Right, talk about feeling like a tiny cog in a giant machine.
Yeah.
You're not even driving.
Not even in the driver's seat of your own life, basically.
Exactly.
And this was a core belief back then.
Oh, yeah. And here's where Fromm makes a really, really interesting connection. He says that by stripping away the comfort and the security of the Catholic Church with its rituals, its hierarchy Protestantism inadvertently pushed people to find that security elsewhere.
So it's like, okay, if I can't rely on the church, if I'm inherently flawed and my fate is sealed,
Right.
then I better find my worth somewhere else, even if it means giving up some of my freedom to do it.
You're getting it. It's such a thought-provoking connection, right? And it helps explain why this whole idea of escaping from freedom is so relevant, even today, even centuries later.
It's wild to think about how, like, these big historical shifts we're talking about, they actually connect to our everyday anxieties, you know? It's like, how does the Protestant Reformation have anything to do with me, like, stressing over what to wear today? Or, I don't know, feeling inadequate because my Instagram feed isn't glamorous enough?
Yeah, and that's what's so brilliant about Fromm. He makes these surprising connections that, when you really think about it, they illuminate the human condition, no matter what era we're talking about.
Okay, so how does that work? Explain it to me.
Okay, so take that Instagram anxiety you mentioned. He'd probably say that our modern obsession with things like, oh, I don't know, personality tests.
Right, everyone loves a good personality test.
Right, or genetic predispositions. Like, we're so determined to find out what makes us us.
And of course, don't forget those weirdly specific targeted ads we see online.
Exactly. All of that, it taps into that same anxiety about predestination, about control that got, I'd say, amplified definitely during the Reformation.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's making more sense now. It's like we're all still searching for that feeling of certainty in a world that just feels increasingly uncertain.
Right.
Speaking of, like, feeling lost in a sea of choices and anxiety, didn't Fromm also have something to say about the rise of department stores?
Yes.
That always struck me as such a random connection, but also kind of brilliant.
He was a very astute observer of everyday life, and he saw those massive department stores as like a powerful symbol of this escape from freedom thing we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm listening. Break it down for me.
So think about it. Back in the day, before these giant department stores, going shopping, it was an experience, you know? You went to your local shop, you knew the shopkeeper, they knew your name.
Oh, right. It was personal.
Exactly. It was a human interaction, not just like a transaction.
Right. You weren't just a credit card number.
Exactly. But then, boom, department stores arrive on the scene, these like sprawling palaces of consumption, right? And suddenly, you're just one face in the crowd.
Overwhelmed by choices.
Exactly. Overwhelmed. And that sense of personal connection, that human element, it just vanishes.
It's like, instead of having a conversation with a friend who actually knows your taste, you're at this giant, overwhelming buffet.
Yeah.
Where everything looks, you know, tempting and delicious, but you're not even sure where to start. And maybe you end up with a stomachache from making all the wrong choices.
Yes. And that feeling, right? That feeling of being completely overwhelmed by options, by all the choices, of feeling like just another cog in the machine that feeds into this anxiety, this need to escape that Fromm was talking about.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about department stores, but what about Mickey Mouse? That one always throws me for a loop.
Right.
How does a cartoon mouse fit into all of this?
Okay, so Fromm, he was writing in the 1940s when, you know, Mickey Mouse was like super popular.
Right, everyone loved Mickey.
Exactly. So Fromm, he argued that part of Mickey's appeal was that he kind of embodied this universal feeling, this feeling of being small, a little powerless, especially in a world that often feels overwhelming, you know, like you can't control it.
Yeah, it's like that classic David and Goliath thing. Mickey's always going up against, you know, some giant, or Pete, or some scary cat, right?
Right. And he always manages to outsmart them. He finds a way.
But he always finds a way to survive.
But here's the thing, and this is what Fromm found really interesting. Mickey often escapes through, like, sheer luck or wit. He doesn't necessarily confront his problems head on.
Because facing your problems head on is hard.
It is.
Especially when you're feeling small and the problems feel huge.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes it's just easier to hope for a lucky break or some clever workaround, you know? Avoid the conflict altogether.
And that's exactly what worried Fromm. He worried that constantly seeing this kind of escape, even in a cartoon character, it reinforces this idea that we're ultimately powerless.
So it's like the subtle message that we're getting from our entertainment. Don't even bother trying to change the system. You're too small. You'll never win.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thinking that Fromm saw as, well, dangerous. If we believe that we're powerless, then we're way more likely to just accept things as they are.
Yeah.
Even if it means sacrificing, our individuality or freedom to make a real difference.
Wow. Okay, that's kind of a depressing thought. So it really makes you think about all the ways, big and small, that this whole escape from freedom thing, it plays out in our own lives, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, think about it. The anxieties we feel about, I don't know, fitting in on social media, the constant pressure to conform to certain expectations, the feeling of being constantly bombarded with information from every direction. It can feel very, very overwhelming.
And that's exactly Fromm's point. It's not just about historical events or these big abstract ideas. It's about the very real challenges that we face as human beings, just trying to navigate a world that often feels like it's spinning way too fast.
Right.
And it's about recognizing that this longing for simple answers, for someone to just tell us what to do, to provide that escape hatch that can actually lead us further away from the kind of freedom, the real freedom, that brings true fulfillment.
So if this constant attempt to escape from freedom, to find comfort in these little boxes of certainty, if that's the problem, what's the solution? What's the alternative? How do we stop feeling lost at sea? So we've talked about the problem, this whole escape from freedom thing that Fromm laid out so well. But what's the solution? How do we go from feeling lost at sea, like we're drowning in choices, to actually, swimming confidently?
Well, Fromm, he believed that the path to what he called positive freedom, it starts with a deep dive inward.
Okay.
He was a huge, huge advocate for self-awareness.
Self-awareness, okay.
Really understanding your own needs, your fears, your desires, and how all of those things influence the choices you make every single day.
So it's less about frantically searching for the right answer out there in the world and all the chaos.
No.
It's more about first understanding what makes you you.
Exactly. It's about recognizing, are you unconsciously just following the crowd? Are you always seeking validation from other people, or letting yourself be totally swayed by all those external pressures, those expectations?
Yeah.
Instead of really tuning into your own inner compass.
Okay, so that makes sense. It's like realizing, hey, I've been wearing these shoes, these uncomfortable shoes that everyone says are cool.
Right.
But actually what I really want are those comfy sneakers, the ones that actually bring me joy.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Just knowing yourself better, it's not quite enough.
Okay, there's more.
It's like laying the foundation of a house. Jim would say that self-awareness, it's that foundation. Now you got to start building.
Okay.
And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Critical thinking, okay.
It's about questioning all those assumptions you've picked up along the way.
Right.
Seeing through the BS, really forming your own informed opinions.
So not just accepting things, at face value, but really digging deeper, questioning the why behind things.
Yes.
Thinking for yourself.
Yes. Not letting other people do your thinking for you.
Okay, that's powerful.
Right. And here's the thing. This is important. It's not about becoming cynical or just trusting everything you hear. It's about really engaging with the world, but with a discerning mind.
Okay.
Being curious, asking questions.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to, respectfully disagree or see things differently.
Right, because even disagreeing, that takes some courage. To not just go along with the crowd. It's being intentional about, I don't know, which news sources you trust or how you consume information online. You're not just blindly following whatever pops up on your feed. You're thinking about their biases, you're fact-checking, you're maybe even seeking out alternative perspectives to get a more, well-rounded view.
Now you're talking. And then finally, Fromm believed that this positive freedom thing, it requires something that might surprise you.
What's that?
Genuine connection.
Connection.
With yourself, yeah, but also with others.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it also seems really hard, especially now, right?
I know, right?
I mean, we've talked about how modern life can feel so impersonal. So how do you actually build real, genuine connection when it feels like everyone's just, I don't know, staring at their phones all the time?
Well, he was a big believer in the power of love.
Love, okay.
But not just, any kind of love.
Yeah.
He was talking about love that's rooted in deep mutual respect, understanding, a shared commitment to each other's growth as human beings.
So less about the Hollywood rom-com version of love.
Right, exactly.
And more about those deep, meaningful connections with people who really see you and get you.
Exactly. It's about approaching all your relationships, and this could be romantic relationships, friendships, family. It's about approaching those relationships with openness, with empathy, with a real willingness to be present, to really be there for each other.
And I think what's so powerful about that is it sort of redefines what it means to be an individual.
Right.
It's recognizing that, you know what, we're all kind of in this together, right? We're all navigating this crazy thing called life. And those connections, those bonds, those relationships, those are what give life meaning.
Beautifully said. Fromm, he believed that positive freedom, it's not like a destination you arrive at one day.
Right.
It's an ongoing process. It's something that we're all constantly working towards. It's about constantly striving to live a life that's meaningful, that's in alignment with your values, to really embrace what makes you unique, and to connect with the world in a way that feels, real, authentic, and ultimately fulfilling.
It's funny, we started this conversation, this whole deep dive, talking about feeling trapped by freedom, but the solution Fromm offers is actually about embracing a deeper, more meaningful kind of freedom, isn't it?
It is.
It's the freedom to be your true self, to think for yourself, and to connect with others in a genuine way. And you know what? As much as we like to think we've got it all figured out now, here in the 21st century, Fromm was writing about these things back in the 1940s.
Right.
But it's amazing how relevant his ideas still are.
Absolutely.
It's like he could see the future. He could see the challenges we'd be facing.
And that's the thing about, the really great thinkers. They offer these timeless insights, this wisdom that can help us navigate the craziness of the world no matter what era we're living in.
And on that note, as we wrap up this deep dive into Erich Fromm's Escape from Freedom, we want to thank you for listening, for being here with us, and we want to leave you with this. What does true freedom mean to you? And what's one small step, one little thing you can do today to maybe embrace it a little bit more fully in your own life? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.